Happy New Year! Wow, that feels like a loaded wish this year. So many of us have so many hopes and fears for 2021. We've put a lot of pressure on the idea of 2020 ending and on 2021 to be better. That in mind, our subject for the first service of the new year is resolution. Although the end of a calendar year is a mostly arbitrary milestone, we do observe it as a society, and so collectively, we are looking for resolution to 2020. And is it an understatement to say 2020 leaves a lot of loose ends? But Chad and I didn't want to be too obvious and focus on the type of resolutions that people make to improve themselves and their lives. Besides, Chad doesn't make New Year's resolutions. So we started turning the word resolution around in our minds. Did it have some other meaning that felt especially relevant at the end of the year?
Well, it turns out resolution does have several meanings, including clarity, decision, agreement, as in conflict resolution, commitment, and ending. So, at this time when our desire for and lack of resolution feels readily apparent, we're going to spend this service exploring how we find, forge, and reach for resolution, and how we might deal with not getting it. We can't promise you that you'll leave today feeling less confused and unsatisfied when faced with a lack of resolution, but hopefully you will feel a little better knowing you're not alone in this totally human experience. Perhaps, ironically, we start with resolution as ending. In the narrative context, the conclusion that comes at the ending of a story. But a resolution is not always quite the same as an ending. According to the website literaryterms.net, the resolution, also known as the denouement, is the conclusion of the story's plot. It's where any unanswered questions are answered or loose ends are tied. The resolution allows a story to end without trailing off or leaving the reader confused or unsatisfied.
Confused or unsatisfied. Personally, I feel that way a lot. Am I suffering from a lack of resolution? I don't just want resolution at the end of a story. I want resolution at the end of a party, a meeting, an argument, a relationship, a life. My mom died 20 years ago, and I'm still working on finding resolution to her life story and our relationship. I think I could benefit from the Tibetan Buddhist perspective, as described in an article by scholars Robert Goss and Dennis Kloss. Tibetan Buddhism recognizes that survivors have many feelings after someone dies. Some feelings, such as regret, longing, guilt, or anger, are problematic because they stem from unresolved relationships with the dying person, what in the West would be called unfinished business. Few living bonds are wholly positive, so when there are problematic relationships, there are, in Tibetan Buddhism, explicit instructions for resolving negative feelings. Once the feelings are resolved, however, it does not mean that the bond with the deceased is severed. Yes, my mom's life clearly had an ending, but though she's gone, emotional loose ends, at least for me, have lingered. I can't help but compare my feelings of lacking resolution after my mom's death with the feelings after the death of our dog, Oscar, at the end of 2017. Yes, I realize I'm comparing my relationship to a dog with my relationship to a person, and I don't see a problem with that. The point, at least for our purposes this morning, is that while I was extremely saddened by Oscar's death, and we will always miss him, I don't feel unsettled by nagging questions. My relationship with Oscar had an ending that was terribly hard, but leaves me with a feeling of conclusion that I can best describe as peace.
This is a instrumental piece I sort of wrote in Oscar's last days. It's called Oscar's Ode, and as fits our theme, I've never actually finished it, so it's different every time I play it.
Most of life is flux. There is no instruction manual, no user's guide, no workbook with the answers in the back of the book. In the introduction to his book, Life is Like a Musical, Tim Federle encourages us to embrace the possibilities forged by that uncertainty. Friends, you've got to cast yourself in the role you want to play. No, need to, even if others don't see it for you. Few people are lucky enough to be born into the perfect body, voice, and era that lines up with their dream part. And I'm using the phrase dream part loosely here. All sorts of us have the kinds of ambitions and desires that the world is not ready or willing to grant us for any number of reasons. If you're not one of those lucky folks who gets to automatically step into the part they think they're born to play, then you have to make the leap and figure out what writing your own role and destiny means to you. The comedian, writer, and star Amy Schumer has talked extensively about how people weren't willing to cast her in funny roles. So she had to create the part of Amy Schumer for herself. Same with Whoopi Goldberg and Lily Tomlin, who both got their starts during doing one-woman shows. I find this endlessly inspiring and a bit depressing. But that's life. How can you create your own dream part? Maybe it means literally joining an amateur improv troupe and becoming so quirky and dynamic that you actually write your own material. But maybe we're not talking about just the arts here. Perhaps casting yourself in the part you want means no longer dating people who treat you like you're the hired help. Maybe casting yourself in your dream part means deciding in your own way to create something every day you've got on earth. A poem, a sketch of someone on the subway, a sapling you plant at the side of the road. Just because.
Resolution can mean something admirable, like steadfastness or tenacity. Tim Federle's commitment to writing your own dream part. But it has synonyms with slightly different connotations. Words like stubbornness and obstinacy. This is the facet of resolution we see or we display when we seek resolution for the sake of having resolution. Certainty for the comfort of being certain, out of fear of irresolution or ambiguity. This type of resolution is what we are warned against in this Zen story. A Zen master received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. The master served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he no longer could restrain himself. It is overfull. No more will go in. You are like this cup, the master replied. You are so full of your own opinions and speculations that nothing more can be added. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?
It is human nature to summon certainty where we don't have it. To, for example, know why that person did that thing. Psychotherapist Rachel Wally offers a way for us to catch ourselves, filling our minds with stories about other people, and a way to let our preconceived notions, no matter how satisfying, drain away to leave room for understanding. In her piece, Letting Go of Stories About Other People, she writes, someone cuts you off in traffic. What a jerk! A date stands you up. She obviously doesn't like you. Your colleague gives you a dirty look across the room. Your last email must have really pissed him off. In so many places in our lives, we see a behavior and automatically make a meaning out of it. Everything from a glance to an email gets snappily run through our minds and attached to a reaction or feeling. Part of this is biological. As animals, we're built to rapidly process information so that we can react quickly, if need be. It's how survival instincts work. However, most things we're reacting to aren't life or death level situations. Here's how I work with my own brain to stop getting so upset by all these little situations. I call it alternate stories. Every time something happens that starts to get me to feel negative, judgmental, sad, or angry, I tell myself an alternate story about what might have been going on for the other person. For example, say a person cuts me off in traffic. My first response is to think, hey, look out, jerk. And then I proceed to get mad, feel my adrenaline rise, and start tailgating that car just to show him he can't treat me like that. But before I take any action or speak, I think to myself, is there any other possible reason that guy could have made that lane change right in front of me? Maybe he's on the phone hearing news that someone in his family just had to go to the hospital and is totally not paying attention. Maybe he's trying to get to the hospital because he's having chest pains. Maybe he's had a horrible day and his wife left him and he's totally disconnected from anything else besides his own pain. Maybe he's just had a bug fly into his eye. Maybe he really looked in his mirror and thought he saw no one there. Maybe he's really nervous on the freeway and just made a mistake. Or maybe he really is a jerk. Maybe, but I just can't know. And as you can see from my list of maybes, there's no way for me to know what's going on with anybody else as they do whatever it is they're doing. Sure, I may have some really good guesses sometimes, but the point of this is this. None of us can ever know for sure what's going on with anyone else. Unless we ask them, and sometimes even then we can't be sure. Going through some alternate stories whenever I feel reactionary helps me to remember that I can't know what's up with that other person, and that sometimes my behavior could look as just as annoying to someone else, even if I didn't mean it that way at all. The power of the alternate story technique is that it reconnects me to my compassion, my sense of, oh yeah, sometimes I do that too. If I don't know for sure that he meant to run me off the road, it's easier for me to allow space in my heart for him. And at the same time, it helps me to detach from my belief that I know anything. In this place of unattachment, rather than having to soothe my hurts or calm my anger, I realize that I am free.
Resolution, in the sense of clarity of meaning and certainty, eludes us even as we cling to the illusion that we have found it. I'd say maybe especially when we cling to the illusion that we have found it. Our illusion may rest in what we see as our own mastery of rational thought, or in a belief that there is a higher power, a greater meaning, and we can discern it through faith. In the introduction to her book, Doubt, A History, Jennifer Michael Hecht sees what she describes as a mutual blindness in these polarized approaches to the question of meaning. Some people may be tone deaf to the idea of evidence, she writes. Some may be tone deaf to the feeling that there is a higher power. We must forgive them each their failings. We look for certainty wherever we think we might find it because none of us, believers and rationalists alike, can escape a deeper understanding that we can't actually have it. From Hecht's introduction to her book again. Great believers and great doubters seem like opposites, but they are more similar to each other than they are to the mass of relatively disinterested or acquiescent men and women. This is because they are both awake to the fact that we live between two divergent realities. On one side, there is a world in our heads and in our lives, so long as we are not contradicted by death and disaster. And that is a world of reason and plans, love and purpose. On the other side, there is the world beyond our human life, an equally real world in which there is no sign of caring or value, planning or judgment, love or joy. We live in a meaning rupture because we are human and the universe is not. And that brings us to the end of the selections Amy and I made. I warned you early on, we didn't promise any sense of resolution, and I think Jennifer Michael Hecht gives us the reason why. I don't have a specific question to throw out to all of you for our discussion at this point, but I guess the theme here is resolution. So the question I'll put to you is, do you seek it? Where do you find it? How do you accept when you can't have it? And again, as we did with Joys and Sorrows, raise your hand virtually or physically, or type something into the chat and you will be called on to unmute.
I see Bruce.
To me, one thing about resolution is you go from a discomfort to a comfort, or a dissonance to something that sounds right. As a musician, we use this all the time. A very, very familiar one that you're going to know and be uncomfortable with is you're going to want to finish that. There is something unfinished when you come to, we have not completed the resolution. We want to hear to bring it to a sense of comfort. This happens a lot in music, in any song, and I think you can say the same thing in any day. What's going on? It might be, where is the coffee cup? Why isn't there coffee? What do we need? There may be small things, much like a resolution on shaving a haircut. But every time, day after day, we have little resolutions. It's not like the end of the year when we make a resolution that we're going to break in February. It's not that kind of resolution. Most of us can recognize that. But this is common. This is familiar. We do it every day, over and over. Most of them are no big thing. Take it easy. Find ways to resolve. And take a breath. And play that last chord that you need to make things better in your mind. Or make that pot of coffee and resolve it.
Thanks, Bruce. I see Michelle Jarvie and then someone at Pat and Merle's house. Ah,
You're muted, Michelle.
Sorry, thought I hit it right. I was just going to say I agree with everything Bruce said and would add that I think a lot about Buddhism and the Four Noble Truths when I am seeking resolution and it seems like it's not coming, and just reminding myself of impermanence, that everything changes. That's the law, the constant law of the universe, and that suffering comes when we cling. And I have to usually meditate on that for a while and do some crying before I can really accept it. But that is what has helped me the most.
and Pat or Merle?
Amy, when they cut us off in traffic, our standard is they've got diarrhea.
Kathy Burix has a comment or would like to speak, I think.
One of the things that makes Gone with the Wind a very unusual piece of literature is that it is unresolved at the end. Scarlett says tomorrow is another day, but we really don't know what's going to happen. Somebody wrote a sequel to it, but that's not the same thing. It wasn't Margaret Mitchell's work. But if you think about it, everybody kind of is like, well, so what did happen after that? And very few books that I know of end that way.
Well, I didn't watch The Sopranos, but the ending of it, spoiler alert, is just somebody walking into a cafe, apparently planning to kill the lead characters, but then it goes black, and it's one of the most famous endings in TV because it was so unresolved, and I think that's brilliant because that's kind of life.
There are a couple things in the chat which I'll read in case everybody can't see them. Gary Davis says, thanks. I see myself in many of your examples. I hope I can remember some of these thoughts the next time I want to jump to a conclusion. And Elizabeth Strootman writes, meanings. Thanks, Chad and Amy, for all your thoughtful efforts to bring meaning to our beloved community. Looking for any additional hands. It looks like Roger and Jamie, someone there has a hand raised.
Hi, this is Jamie. We are meaning-seeking creatures. And we do that through story. That's how we naturally communicate with one another, is through story. And one of the big ways we resolve issues, whether it be small or large, painful or otherwise, is that we find meaning in it, and that gives us resolution.
Janice Sancott.
My need for resolution in reading a book or a story, long stories, is such that I usually don't read the middle of a story before I read the end. I usually read the first little bit and skip directly to the end, because it's the ending, the finalization, the resolution that makes me try to determine whether I want to go through the middle part or not. And it's, as I'm getting older, it's getting to be more of a compulsion. So I am really searching for authors that I have read before that I know have good endings, so that I can actually read a book all the way through and let the ending be a surprise.
Janice, I am the absolute opposite of that. If I know the ending, I probably won't read the rest of the book.
If I could just jump in for a moment, Janice, I used to do that a lot more and it drove Chad crazy. He'd be like, "Are you looking at the end?" But I would find out that, like, reading the end, I would make assumptions then about what was going to happen. And then I was often like wrong. So I don't know if that enriched the reading experience or not, but it didn't actually give me resolution. It just gave me some assumptions that would often take me off track. And anyway, just an aside, but now I usually only listen to fiction. I don't read it. So it's much harder to skip ahead to the end. I have to go through the whole thing to get there.
And it seems like that has brought us to the end of our comments for today.
Were those all the chat?
Well, I'm going to throw something in here that we didn't have in the script, and it goes to some extent to the discussion that Janice's comments and mine and Amy's. One of the things that Brock spoke on this years ago, we put a lot of weight on endings. And sometimes in a way that overshadows everything that led up to it. I see that a lot as an attorney, particularly when I'm handling divorce cases and have people who come to me and say, that everything was a waste because they're getting divorced now, and it kind of breaks my heart. And there's this poem that I'm sure I've read at least a couple of times in church by Jack Gilbert called Failing and Flying that I'd like to share. Everyone forgets that Icarus also flew. It's the same when love comes to an end, or the marriage fails and people say they knew it was a mistake, that everybody said it would never work, that she was old enough to know better. But anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Like being there by that summer ocean on the other side of the island while love was fading out of her, the stars burning so extravagantly those nights that anyone could tell you they would never last. Every morning she was asleep in my bed like a visitation, the gentleness in her, like antelope standing in the dawn mist. Each afternoon I watched her coming back through the hot, stony field after swimming, the sea light behind her and the huge sky on the other side of that. Listened to her while we ate lunch. How can they say the marriage failed? Like the people who came back from Provence, when it was Provence, and said it was pretty, but the food was greasy. I believe Icarus was not failing as he fell, but just coming to the end of his triumph.